They say money can buy anything. What nobody tells you is that the people who have the most of it are often the loneliest. The first time I saw Ethan Blackwood, I was standing in the grand foyer of his mansion trying not to shake. Rain tapped softly against windows taller than any building in my hometown, and the polished marble floor reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers hanging 40 feet above my head. Everything around me looked expensive. The artwork. The staircase. Even the silence. Especially the silence. I tightened my grip on the strap of my worn canvas bag and followed Mrs. Whitmore, the house manager, through the enormous entrance hall. My sneakers felt embarrassingly loud against the marble. "One rule," she said without looking back. Her voice was crisp and professional. "Never speak unless Mr. Blackwood speaks first." I blinked. "Excuse me?" She stopped and turned toward me. Her expression remained perfectly neutral. "You heard me correctly, Grace." I nodded even though I wasn't sure I understood. I'd worked in hotels, restaurants, and private homes before. Wealthy people often had strange rules. But this one felt different. Less about manners and more about survival. Mrs. Whitmore continued walking. "Breakfast is served at 6:30 sharp. Mr. Blackwood leaves for the office at 7:15. Dinner is prepared every evening whether he eats it or not. Staff are expected to remain professional at all times. Whether he eats it or not." Something about that phrase stayed with me. We passed room after room that seemed untouched by human life. A formal dining room large enough to seat 20. A library lined with dark walnut shelves. A sitting room where every pillow looked perfectly arranged and completely unused. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum dedicated to someone's success. When we reached the staff corridor, Mrs. Whitmore handed me a small brass key. "Your room is upstairs. You'll begin tomorrow morning." I thanked her and climbed the narrow staircase to the 3rd floor. Compared to the rest of the mansion, the room was simple. A twin bed. A dresser. A small window overlooking the gardens. It was more than enough. Better than the tiny apartment I shared with my younger brother. Better than worrying about next month's rent. Better than another overdue medical bill. I sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long breath. Maybe this job would finally help me get ahead. Maybe life was finally giving me a break. A sudden sound pulled me from my thoughts. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Somewhere below. Curiosity got the better of me. I crossed the room and carefully opened the door. The mansion was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you lower your own breathing. I moved toward the balcony overlooking the foyer. And that's when I saw him. Ethan Blackwood stood alone at the bottom of the staircase. 6'3". Dark suit. Broad shoulders. His hands rested in his pockets as he stared through the massive windows into the storm outside. He didn't move. Didn't check his phone. Didn't speak. He simply stood there surrounded by more wealth than most people could imagine. And somehow he looked completely alone. Then he turned slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face. Strong features. Tired eyes. The expression of a man carrying something heavier than anyone could see. For one brief second, I forgot every warning I'd been given. Because the coldest billionaire in New York didn't look powerful. He looked lost. And I had no idea that accepting a housekeeping job in his mansion was about to change both of our lives forever. The next morning, I woke up before dawn to the soft hum of the mansion's heating system and the distant sound of rain still falling outside. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the unfamiliar ceiling above me and remembered. Blackwood Manor. My first day. By 6 o'clock, I was dressed in my uniform and standing in the service kitchen with the rest of the staff. Nobody talked much. They moved with quiet efficiency, like people who had performed the same routine 1,000 times. Mrs. Whitmore handed me a schedule and pointed toward the east wing. Guest rooms first. Then the library. Stay organized. I nodded and got to work. The mansion was even larger in daylight. Sunlight filtered through towering windows, turning the marble floors gold. Every room looked perfect, yet somehow empty. Family photos were almost non-existent. There were no children's drawings on refrigerators. No signs of birthday parties. No evidence that anyone truly lived here. By mid-morning, I had finished cleaning 3 guest suites that looked untouched. As I pushed my cart down a long hallway, I noticed a door at the very end. Unlike every other door in the house, this one was dark mahogany with an old brass handle. There were no decorations nearby. No artwork. No furniture. Just the door. Something about it felt different. Important. I slowed my steps. Before I could get closer, another housekeeper named Linda appeared from around the corner. Her eyes widened immediately. "Do not go down there." I stopped. "Why?" She glanced around before lowering her voice. "Because nobody does." I looked back toward the door. "What is it?" Linda shook her head. "I have worked here 4 years. I do not know." "Nobody knows." Then she walked away before I could ask another question. The rest of the morning passed slowly. Around noon, I helped prepare the dining room for lunch. The table could seat 16 people, yet only one place setting was arranged. A single crystal glass. A single plate. A single chair pulled out. The sight made my chest tighten for reasons I could not explain. At exactly 12:30, Ethan entered. Every conversation stopped. Every movement slowed. Not because anyone was afraid. Because everyone seemed trained to disappear whenever he appeared. He walked into the room carrying a tablet and a cup of black coffee. His suit looked flawless. His expression did not. Up close, the exhaustion I had noticed the night before was even more obvious. Shadows lingered beneath his eyes. He looked like a man who slept very little and thought too much. I lowered my gaze and continued arranging silverware. The rule echoed in my mind. Never speak unless Mr. Blackwood speaks first. He sat alone at the massive table. One man surrounded by 16 empty chairs. The silence felt heavier than the furniture. Then something unexpected happened. His coffee cup slipped from his hand. It was a small mistake. The kind anyone could make. The cup tipped sideways, spilling dark coffee across the white tablecloth. Nobody moved. For a second, the entire room froze. I did not think. I simply grabbed a towel from the service cart and stepped forward. "Careful," I said softly. "It is still hot." The words escaped before I remembered the rule. The room became completely silent. Mrs. Whitmore looked horrified. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes toward me. Those gray-blue eyes locked onto mine. Not angry. Not surprised. Just studying me. Seconds stretched uncomfortably long. Then, without saying a single word, he handed me the empty cup. And for the first time since arriving at the mansion, I had the strange feeling that Ethan Blackwood had actually seen me. The rest of that afternoon, I could feel eyes following me, although every time I looked up, nobody seemed to be watching. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was the embarrassment of speaking directly to Ethan when everyone else treated him like a distant storm they preferred not to approach. Either way, my nerves stayed tangled long after lunch ended. By 4 o'clock, I was assigned to dust the second-floor west wing. The corridor stretched endlessly beneath tall windows overlooking the gardens. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds in thin golden streaks, illuminating droplets that still clung to the hedges below. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, I found myself thinking about the locked door. The one nobody talked about. The one hidden at the end of the hallway like a secret everyone had agreed to ignore. I tried focusing on work. Dust shelves. Polish tables. Straighten books. Simple tasks. familiar tasks. But curiosity has a way of growing louder when nobody answers your questions. Before I realized what I was doing, I was walking down the long corridor toward the far end of the mansion. My cleaning cart remained behind. My footsteps echoed softly against hardwood floors. The door looked even stranger up close. Dark mahogany. Brass handle worn smooth with age. No nameplate. No decoration. Nothing. I reached out before I could stop myself. My fingers touched the handle. It turned. My breath caught. The door was unlocked. Every warning I had received should have sent me back immediately. Instead, I pushed the door open a few inches. Cool air drifted out. The room beyond sat in near darkness. Heavy curtains blocked most of the afternoon sun. I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not dust. Not neglect. Fresh flowers. Then I saw the photographs. Dozens of them. Framed pictures covering shelves, tables, and walls. A young woman smiled from every corner of the room. Blonde hair. Bright eyes. The kind of smile that seemed genuine even in a photograph. Some pictures showed her standing beside Ethan. Others showed her alone. Laughing on a beach. Holding a cup of coffee. Looking directly at the camera as if she knew she was loved. My chest tightened. This was not a storage room. It was a memorial. A life preserved in perfect detail. I took another step forward. A small music box rested on a table near the window. Beside it sat a dried white rose protected beneath a glass dome. Everything looked untouched. Carefully maintained. Frozen in time. Suddenly a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around so fast my heart nearly stopped. Ethan stood in the doorway. Neither of us spoke. The silence felt enormous. His expression revealed nothing, yet something in his eyes had changed. The distance I usually saw there was gone. Replaced by something far more vulnerable. For a long moment, he simply looked at the photographs. Then he looked at me. I opened my mouth, searching for an apology. Before I could speak, he said quietly, almost to himself, "Nobody comes in here." His voice carried no anger. Somehow that made it worse. I swallowed hard. "I am sorry." His gaze drifted back toward the smiling woman in the nearest frame. The room felt smaller somehow. Sadder. Then, after several seconds, he asked a question I never expected. "Do you think memories fade if you stop looking at them?" The question caught me completely off guard. I looked from Ethan to the photographs surrounding us. The woman seemed alive in every frame, her smile bright enough to fill the room that now felt weighed down by silence. I chose my words carefully. "I do not think memories fade because we stop looking at them," I said softly. "I think they fade when we stop feeling them." For a moment, nothing changed. Then something flickered across his face. Not anger. Not approval. Something harder to define. He glanced toward the nearest photograph. Her name was Claire. The words were quiet, almost fragile. I realized then that this was probably the first time anyone had spoken her name in this room for a very long time. "She looks kind," I replied. A faint smile touched his lips before disappearing. She was. His eyes remained fixed on the photograph. She could walk into a room and make strangers feel like family. I listened without interrupting. The mansion suddenly made sense. The empty dining room. The endless silence. The loneliness hidden behind polished marble and perfect furniture. This house had not always been empty. It had simply lost the person who made it feel alive. Ethan stepped farther into the room and picked up the music box from the table. He turned the small key on its side. A soft melody drifted into the air. Gentle notes filled the space between us. The sound felt oddly warm against the sadness surrounding it. "Claire loved this song," he said. "She played it every Sunday morning." I watched him carefully. The cold businessman everyone feared seemed completely absent here. Standing before me was simply a man remembering someone he missed. "You keep this room exactly the same," I said before I could stop myself. He nodded. "Every detail." His gaze traveled slowly across the shelves. "Sometimes it feels like if I change anything, I lose another piece of her." The honesty in his voice made my chest ache. I understood that feeling more than he could know. After our parents died, my younger brother Noah and I had kept their old coffee maker for years. It barely worked. The machine leaked constantly. But throwing it away felt impossible. Some objects become anchors for memories. We know they are only things, yet they carry pieces of people we cannot bear to lose. "Maybe," I said carefully, "the memories are not in the room." Ethan looked at me. "Maybe they are in you." The words lingered between us. For the first time since entering the mansion, he seemed uncertain. As if he had never considered that possibility. Outside, the sun slipped lower in the sky. Golden light broke through a narrow opening in the curtains, illuminating Claire's photographs. Ethan followed the beam of sunlight with his eyes. Then he quietly closed the music box. The melody faded. The silence returned. But this silence felt different somehow. Less cold. Less lonely. He walked toward the door and paused. "Mrs. Whitmore will be looking for you." I nodded. "Yes, sir." He hesitated for a second. "And Grace?" I turned back. "Thank you for answering the question." Then he left the room. I stood there alone among the photographs, listening to the distant sound of his footsteps disappear down the hallway. And for the first time since arriving at Blackwood Manor, I began to understand that the greatest secret in the house was not hidden behind a locked door. It was hidden inside Ethan Blackwood himself. That evening, after finishing my shift, I took the subway back to Queens. The contrast felt almost unreal. 1 hour earlier, I had been walking through hallways lined with imported marble and antique paintings. Now I was stepping over a puddle near a broken curb outside my apartment building. The elevator had been out of service for 3 weeks, so I climbed 4 flights of stairs carrying a grocery bag filled with discount canned soup and a loaf of bread. By the time I reached apartment 4C, my legs felt like lead. The moment I opened the door, I heard Noah coughing from the living room. My heart tightened immediately. "I am home," I called. "In here," he answered. His voice sounded tired. Too tired. I found him curled up on the old couch beneath a blanket, a textbook resting on his lap. At 16, Noah should have been worrying about baseball games, college applications, and weekend plans with friends. Instead, he spent most of his time balancing school with doctor appointments and medications that seemed to grow more expensive every month. "How are you feeling?" I asked. He shrugged. "Better than yesterday." Which usually meant he was not feeling better at all. I sat beside him and handed him a sandwich from the grocery bag. He smiled weakly. "You did not have to buy dinner." "Yes, I did." He took a bite while I opened the stack of mail sitting on the coffee table. My stomach dropped almost instantly. Medical bills. Insurance notices. Payment reminders. Numbers printed in black ink that seemed to get larger every week. I quickly turned the envelopes over before Noah could see my expression. "Anything important?" he asked. "Nothing exciting." It was a lie. We both knew it. But neither of us had the energy to discuss it. Later that night, after Noah went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a calculator and a notebook. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I added every expense twice, hoping the numbers would somehow change. Rent. Utilities. Medication. Follow-up appointments. The total sat there staring back at me. Impossible. My new job paid better than any position I had ever held. Even so, it felt like trying to empty an ocean with a coffee cup. I rubbed my eyes and looked toward the small window above the sink. Rain had started again. Tiny droplets slid down the glass beneath the glow of a street lamp outside. Without meaning to, I thought about Ethan. About the room filled with photographs. About the sadness hidden behind wealth most people only dreamed about. Funny, I thought. The world probably looked at Ethan Blackwood and saw a man who had everything. The world looked at me and saw a woman who had almost nothing. Yet both of us seemed trapped by things money could not fix. Around midnight, my phone buzzed on the table. I expected a reminder from the hospital or another billing notification. Instead, the screen displayed a message from Mrs. Whitmore. Tomorrow morning. Mr. Blackwood has requested that you assist with breakfast service personally. I stared at the message for several seconds. In the short time I had worked at the mansion, I had learned one thing. Ethan Blackwood never requested anything without a reason. And for some reason I could not explain, that realization made it impossible to sleep. The next morning, I arrived at the mansion 20 minutes early. Sleep had been impossible. Questions kept circling through my mind. Why had Ethan specifically requested me? Had I done something wrong? Or worse, had I crossed a line by entering Claire's room? The service kitchen buzzed quietly with activity as cooks prepared breakfast. Fresh coffee filled the air. Bacon sizzled on a griddle. The smell should have been comforting. Instead, my stomach twisted with nerves. Mrs. Whitmore handed me a silver tray. Mr. Blackwood will be eating in the sunroom this morning. I blinked. The sunroom? She looked mildly surprised. Yes. It is unusual. That was becoming a pattern. Everything involving Ethan seemed unusual lately. 5 minutes later, I carried the tray through a corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. Morning sunlight streamed across the polished floors. The rain had finally passed, leaving the gardens bright and sparkling outside. I found Ethan seated alone at a small table overlooking the grounds. A newspaper rested beside him, untouched. A cup of coffee sat cooling near his hand. He appeared to be staring at something beyond the gardens, beyond the property, beyond everything. "Good morning, sir," I said softly as I set down the tray. He looked up. "Good morning, Grace." The fact that he remembered my name still felt strange. Most wealthy employers barely remembered the names of half their staff. Ethan waited until I finished arranging the plates. Then he surprised me again. "How is your brother?" Every thought in my head stopped. My hand froze halfway to the tray. Slowly, I looked up. My brother? Ethan seemed to realize what he had revealed. A brief shadow crossed his face. Mrs. Whitmore mentioned him. I knew immediately that was not true. Mrs. Whitmore was many things. A gossip was not one of them. But I also knew better than to challenge him. "He is doing okay," I answered carefully. "Thank you for asking." Ethan nodded. "That is good." The conversation ended there, yet something felt different. He seemed distracted. Thoughtful. As if another question lingered in his mind. For the next 20 minutes, I remained nearby refilling coffee and clearing dishes. Neither of us spoke much. The silence was comfortable in a way I had not expected. Then his phone rang. The sound shattered the calm atmosphere instantly. Ethan glanced at the screen. His expression hardened. "Reschedule the meeting," he said into the phone. A pause followed. "I do not care if the board disagrees." Another pause. "Handle it." He ended the call and set the phone aside. For a brief moment, the cold billionaire everyone described returned. Focused. Controlled. Untouchable. Yet just as quickly, it vanished again. His gaze drifted toward the gardens. Toward nothing in particular. Then he asked quietly, "Do you ever feel guilty for moving forward?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I thought about Noah. About our parents. About every difficult year that followed. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But staying in one place hurts too." Ethan stared out the window for several seconds. His reflection appeared faintly in the glass. A lonely figure surrounded by sunlight. Finally, he gave a small nod. Not agreement. Not disagreement. Just acknowledgement. Then his eyes shifted toward the driveway. I followed his gaze. A black sedan had just entered through the front gates. Something in Ethan's expression changed immediately. The calm disappeared. And for the first time since meeting him, I saw genuine concern. The sedan rolled to a stop in front of the mansion, and the tension in the room became almost visible. Ethan stood slowly from his chair, his gaze fixed on the vehicle below. I had only known him for a short time, but I could already recognize the difference between his usual reserve and whatever this was. This felt personal. A moment later, the front door opened somewhere inside the house. Footsteps echoed through the foyer. Firm. Familiar. Expected. Ethan exhaled quietly and straightened his jacket. You should return to your duties, he said. His voice was polite, but distant again. The invisible wall had returned. I nodded and collected the breakfast dishes without another word. Yet curiosity followed me all morning. Around 10 o'clock, I was arranging fresh flowers in the library when raised voices drifted from a nearby office. Not shouting. Just intense. The kind of conversation people have when neither side wants to lose. I could not make out the words. Only the tone. An hour later, Ethan emerged from the office accompanied by an older man with silver hair and a tailored navy suit. The resemblance was unmistakable. Same eyes. Same posture. Same guarded expression. Family. The older man noticed me immediately. His gaze swept across the room before settling briefly on the flowers I was arranging. Claire always liked white roses, he said. The comment seemed directed at nobody in particular. Ethan's expression tightened. That was a long time ago. The older man sighed. That is exactly the problem. Silence followed. Heavy silence. Then the man left without another word. By lunchtime, the mansion felt strangely unsettled. Staff whispered in corners. Doors opened and closed. Ethan disappeared into meetings. The usual rhythm of the house had been disrupted. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore called me into her office. I immediately worried I had done something wrong. Instead, she handed me a small envelope. This arrived for you. Confused, I accepted it. My name was written neatly across the front. No return address. My stomach tightened as I opened it. Inside was a check. $5,000. I stared at the number in disbelief. It was more money than I had ever held in my hands at one time. Attached was a brief note. For Noah's medical expenses. No signature. No explanation. Just those 5 words. My heart began pounding. There was only one person in the mansion who knew about Noah. Only one person who could write a check that size without thinking twice. I looked up at Mrs. Whitmore. She simply folded her hands on the desk. I have no information regarding where it came from. The statement was so carefully delivered that it answered the question completely. That evening, I stood outside Ethan's office holding the envelope. Warm light spilled beneath the door. My pulse raced. Finally, I knocked. Come in. He sat behind a massive desk reviewing documents. When he saw the envelope in my hand, his expression revealed nothing. I placed the check gently on the desk between us. I cannot accept this. Ethan looked down at it for a moment. Then back at me. Why not? I swallowed hard. Because I did not earn it. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then, very slowly, something unexpected appeared in his eyes. Not disappointment. Respect. And somehow that made refusing him even harder. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The check remained on Ethan's desk between stacks of reports and contracts worth more than I would probably earn in 10 lifetimes. Outside the office windows, evening sunlight stretched across the gardens, painting everything gold. Ethan leaned back in his chair and studied me carefully. Most people would not return it, he said. Most people are carrying burdens you cannot see. The answer slipped out before I could stop it. His eyebrow lifted slightly. And you are not? I smiled faintly. I am. But they are still my burdens. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough for me to notice. For weeks, every conversation between us had felt like crossing a frozen lake, careful and uncertain. This felt different. More honest. Ethan glanced down at the check again before sliding it into a drawer. You are stubborn. I have been called worse. To my surprise, a quiet laugh escaped him. The sound was brief, but real. It transformed his entire face. For a second, I caught a glimpse of the man Claire must have known. The man hidden beneath years of grief and responsibility. Then the moment passed. Tell me something, Grace. Okay. His gaze moved toward the window. Why do you work so hard? I almost laughed at the question. The answer seemed obvious. Because bills do not pay themselves. That is not the real answer. I folded my hands together. Noah. Ethan nodded once. Your brother. I looked down. After our parents died, it became just the two of us. Every decision I make starts with him. The office grew quiet. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock somewhere on the wall. Ethan stared at the city skyline visible beyond the trees. Claire used to say something similar. My eyes lifted. He rarely brought her up first. What did she say? A sad smile touched his face. She said the people we love become the compass that points us through life. The words lingered in the air. I thought about Noah studying late at night despite being exhausted. About hospital visits. About every sacrifice that suddenly felt worthwhile because he was still smiling. She sounds smart. Ethan's smile widened slightly. She usually was. We sat in comfortable silence after that. Not employer and employee. Not billionaire and housekeeper. Just two people talking about the people who mattered most. Eventually I stood to leave. The workday was nearly over. As I reached the door, Ethan spoke again. Grace. I turned. Yes? He hesitated. Money solves many problems. I nodded. It does. His eyes met mine. Tired eyes. Honest eyes. But not loneliness. The words surprised me because they sounded less like a statement and more like a confession. Before I could respond, he looked away. Conversation over. Wall restored. I quietly left the office and closed the door behind me. Later that night, while finishing my last task in the library, I noticed a framed photograph sitting alone on a side table. Claire stood beside Ethan beneath a summer sky, both of them smiling at something beyond the camera. For the first time, I realized the mansion had never really been empty because Claire was gone. It was empty because Ethan had stopped letting anyone inside. And somehow, without meaning to, I had begun opening a door he thought would remain closed forever. 3 days passed without anything unusual happening. At least that was what I kept telling myself. The truth was that everything felt different now. Ethan no longer seemed like a distant figure moving through the mansion like a ghost. We spoke occasionally during breakfast. Sometimes during dinner preparations. Never for long. Never about anything dramatic. Yet each conversation seemed to leave a small crack in the walls he had built around himself. Then came Thursday afternoon. I was folding freshly pressed linens in the laundry room when my phone vibrated. The screen displayed a number I immediately recognized. St. Matthew Medical Center. My heart dropped before I even answered. Grace Parker speaking. Miss Parker, this is Rachel from cardiology. We need to discuss Noah's latest test results. The room suddenly felt too warm. I stepped into the hallway and listened carefully. The nurse's voice remained calm and professional, but every word tightened the knot in my chest. Noah's condition had not worsened. It had not improved either. Additional treatment options were available, but they would require consultations, specialists, and expenses that seemed impossible even to think about. By the time the call ended, I was staring out a window at the gardens without really seeing them. Numbers filled my mind. Costs. Payments. Deadlines. Worries I had carried for years suddenly felt heavier than ever. Grace? I nearly jumped. Ethan stood several feet away. I had not heard him approach. Are you all right? The question was simple. Genuine. Somehow that made answering harder. Everything is fine. The lie sounded weak even to me. Ethan studied my face. That usually means everything is not fine. I looked away toward the gardens. Bright autumn leaves drifted across the lawn. It is Noah. His expression softened immediately. What happened? I hesitated. Sharing personal problems with employers had never been my style. But for some reason, standing there with Ethan felt different. The doctors want additional treatments. More appointments. More specialists. I laughed quietly, though there was nothing funny about it. Sometimes it feels like every time I climb one hill, another mountain appears. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. Then Ethan surprised me. Come with me. I blinked. What? Just trust me. 20 minutes later, we were walking through a section of the mansion I had never seen before. Sunlight streamed through enormous windows overlooking the city. Ethan led me into a room filled with architectural models, blueprints, and framed photographs of hospitals, schools, and community centers. What is this? I asked. The projects that matter most to me. I looked around in confusion. Public schools. Children's hospitals. Research centers. None of it matched the image most people had of a billionaire obsessed with profits and skyscrapers. Ethan picked up a photograph from a shelf. Claire stood beside a group of smiling children outside a medical clinic. This was her idea, he said quietly. She believed success meant helping people carry burdens they should not have to carry alone. I stared at the photograph. Then at him. For the first time, I understood something important. Ethan was not trying to help me because he pitied me. He was trying to help because someone he loved had taught him to care. The realization changed everything. Then he looked directly at me and said something that left me speechless. Grace, you keep acting like accepting help makes you weak. His voice remained gentle. But sometimes letting people stand beside you is the strongest thing you can do. His words stayed with me long after I left that room. Sometimes letting people stand beside you is the strongest thing you can do. I repeated the sentence in my mind during the drive home, while climbing the stairs to my apartment, even while making dinner for Noah. Part of me wanted to believe him. Another part refused. Life had taught me that depending on people came with risks. Promises could disappear. Circumstances could change. The only thing I truly trusted was hard work. 2 weeks passed. Autumn settled deeper over New York. The trees lining the streets turned shades of gold and amber. At Blackwood Manor, routines continued. Breakfasts. Meetings. Quiet conversations. Yet something had shifted between Ethan and me. We spoke more often now. Not every day. Not for long. But enough that the mansion no longer felt quite so silent. Then everything changed on a Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Whitmore called me into her office. The moment I saw the envelope in her hand, my stomach tightened. This arrived for you this morning, she said. I accepted it and glanced at the logo in the corner. Starlight Children's Foundation. Confused, I opened it. The letter inside was brief. Professional. formal. By the second paragraph, my heart was racing. They were offering me a full-time administrative position at one of their family support centers in Connecticut. Better salary. Health benefits. Housing assistance. Career growth opportunities. It was the kind of offer people waited years to receive. The kind of opportunity one could never have imagined. My hands trembled slightly as I read it again. Then a second time. Then a third. That evening, I sat across from Noah at our kitchen table while he read the letter. "Grace," he said quietly. "This is amazing. It is in Connecticut. That is not that far." I smiled faintly. "Easy for you to say." Noah folded the paper carefully. "You should take it." I stared at him. "What?" He shrugged. "You have spent years taking care of me. Maybe it is time something good happened for you." The words hit harder than he realized. Later that night, I stood by the apartment window watching headlights move through the darkness below. The city hummed softly beyond the glass. I should have felt excited. Relieved. Hopeful. Instead, an unexpected sadness settled over me. The next morning, I carried the letter in my bag all the way to the mansion. Every hallway suddenly looked different. Every familiar room felt fragile. Temporary. Around noon, I found myself standing outside Ethan's office. The door was partially open. He sat at his desk reviewing documents. Sunlight streamed across the room. For a moment, I simply watched him. The concentration on his face. The coffee growing cold beside him. The man who had slowly begun letting the world back into his life. Finally, I knocked. Ethan looked up immediately. "Grace." I stepped inside and placed the letter on his desk. His eyes moved across the page. Slowly. Carefully. When he finished reading, the room became completely silent. Then he looked at me. And for the first time since I had met him, genuine worry appeared in his eyes. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Ethan continued staring at the letter as though it contained far more than a job offer. Outside the office windows, clouds drifted across the afternoon sky, casting moving shadows over the gardens. Finally, he placed the paper on his desk and folded his hands. "Connecticut," he said quietly. "Yes." His jaw tightened slightly. "It is a good opportunity." I nodded. "It is." The words sounded strangely hollow. Ethan leaned back in his chair. For the first time since I had known him, he seemed unsure of what to say. The man who negotiated billion-dollar contracts looked completely unprepared for a simple conversation. "When would you leave?" he asked. 3 weeks. The answer settled heavily between us. Ethan looked away toward the window. "That is soon." I forced a small smile. "That is usually how job offers work." He almost smiled back, but it faded before fully appearing. "And Noah?" "The foundation has connections with specialists. Better insurance coverage. Better resources." Ethan nodded slowly. Rationally, there was nothing to argue with. The position offered everything I needed. Stability. Security. A future. Yet neither of us seemed happy about it. I left the office shortly afterward and spent the rest of the afternoon working in silence. The mansion felt different now. Every hallway carried the strange awareness that my time there might be ending. Every familiar room suddenly seemed precious. That evening, I found Ethan standing alone in the library after most of the staff had gone home. A fire crackled softly in the stone fireplace. He was holding one of the photographs of Claire. I almost turned around and left, but his voice stopped me. "Do you know what the hardest part of grief is?" I hesitated. "What?" His eyes remained fixed on the photograph. "Eventually, you learn how to survive it." I waited quietly. "People think that is the victory." A sad smile touched his face. "It is not." He set the frame back on the shelf. The hardest part is when life asks you to open your heart again. The room fell silent. I knew he was no longer talking about Claire. My pulse quickened. Ethan walked toward the window and stared into the darkness beyond the glass. For years, everything stayed exactly the same. The same routines. The same rooms. The same walls. His voice remained calm. Controlled. Yet something deeper moved beneath it. Then one day someone arrives and reminds you that being alive is not the same as living. My breath caught. He still was not looking at me. Perhaps because it was easier that way. Perhaps because some truths are difficult to say while meeting another person's eyes. Finally, he turned. The firelight reflected softly across his features. You changed this house, Grace. The words hit me harder than I expected. I did not do anything special. You did. His voice was certain. You treated people like people. Not titles. Not responsibilities. People. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my chest. Before I could answer, Ethan glanced toward the letter still resting on a nearby table. His expression softened. And that is exactly why you should take the job. I stared at him in disbelief. Every part of me expected him to ask me to stay. Instead, he was telling me to leave. Yet somehow that hurt far more. Because for the first time, I realized he was putting my future ahead of his own loneliness. And in that moment, I began to understand just how much Ethan Blackwood had changed. My final week at the mansion arrived faster than I was prepared for. Every morning felt borrowed. Every conversation felt important. The staff had begun treating my departure as something inevitable, but I noticed Ethan never mentioned it again. Not once. He buried himself in meetings. Conference calls. Business trips. The distance returned, although this time it felt intentional. As if he were preparing himself for the moment I would walk away. 2 days before my departure, Noah called while I was finishing work in the library. His voice sounded stronger than it had in months. The specialist approved the treatment plan, he said excitedly. Grace, this could actually work. I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. That is amazing. You are really doing this, huh? He asked. You are moving. I looked around the library. The shelves. The fireplace. The familiar room that had become part of my life. I think so. After the call ended, I stood quietly by the window. The sun was setting beyond the gardens. Orange light stretched across the grounds. Everything looked beautiful. Temporary. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Mrs. Whitmore entered carrying a small envelope. This arrived for you. My stomach tightened immediately. Another letter. Another surprise. I opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. Grace, tomorrow evening. 7 o'clock. The East Garden. There was no signature. There did not need to be. The next day passed painfully slowly. By 6:55, I found myself walking through the gardens beneath a sky painted deep shades of blue and gold. The air carried the crisp scent of autumn. Fallen leaves crunched softly beneath my shoes. I reached the garden gazebo and stopped. Ethan was already there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city skyline glowed faintly in the distance beyond the trees. Finally, he broke the silence. You are leaving in 48 hours. I nodded. Yes. He looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. I told myself I was prepared for that. Something in his voice made my heart race. Ethan stepped closer. Not dramatically. Just enough to erase some of the distance between us. For years, I convinced myself that losing Claire meant that chapter of my life was over. The evening breeze stirred the leaves around us. Then you arrived. I could not speak. Ethan exhaled slowly. You never treated me like a billionaire. You never cared about my name. My company. My money. His eyes held mine. Honest. Vulnerable. You reminded me how to laugh again. How to hope again. Emotion tightened in my chest. Ethan. He shook his head gently. Let me finish. His voice softened. The day you walked into this house, I thought you were just another employee. A small smile appeared. I was wrong. The silence that followed felt enormous. Then he said the words I had never expected to hear. You became the most important part of my life. My breath caught. Somewhere in the distance, city lights flickered against the darkening sky. And standing there beneath the autumn leaves, I realized leaving was no longer the only thing I was afraid of. For a few seconds, the world seemed to stand still. The autumn breeze moved gently through the garden, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant rain. Ethan's words lingered between us, impossible to ignore and impossible to forget. You became the most important part of my life. I looked at him and saw none of the walls that had surrounded him when I first arrived. No distance. No coldness. No carefully controlled mask. Only honesty. The kind that appears when someone has finally decided they have nothing left to hide. Ethan, I whispered. My voice trembled slightly. I never expected any of this. A faint smile touched his face. Neither did I. We stood there beneath the darkening sky, two people whose lives should never have crossed paths. A billionaire who had spent years hiding from the world. A woman who had spent years carrying responsibilities she never asked for. Yet somehow, every step had led us here. I am still leaving, I said softly. The truth hurt more than I expected. Ethan nodded. I know. There was sadness in his eyes, but no resistance. No attempt to change my mind. Because if you stay only for me, you will always wonder what might have happened. The answer surprised me. You are not going to ask me to stay? A quiet laugh escaped him. No. He looked up toward the stars beginning to appear overhead. The old version of me might have. His gaze returned to mine. But loving someone means wanting what is best for them, even when it is difficult. Emotion tightened in my throat. In that moment, I realized how much he had changed. Not because of money. Not because of success. Because he had learned how to open his heart again. 2 days later, I stood outside the mansion with my suitcase beside me. The car from the foundation waited near the front gate. Staff members gathered to say goodbye. Mrs. Whitmore hugged me unexpectedly. Noah stood nearby grinning despite the chilly weather. Yet my eyes kept searching for one person. Ethan appeared just as the driver finished loading my luggage. He walked toward me holding a small box. Before you go. I accepted it carefully. Inside rested the music box from Claire's room. My eyes widened immediately. Ethan, I cannot take this. Yes, you can. His smile was gentle. Claire believed memories should travel with us. Not trap us. Tears blurred my vision. The significance of the gift was impossible to miss. It was not goodbye. It was trust. It was healing. It was proof that he had finally let go of the fear that had kept him frozen for years. I closed the box carefully and looked at him. What happens now? Ethan glanced toward the road stretching beyond the gates. Then back at me. Now you go build the future you worked so hard for. And you? He smiled. A real smile. Warm and unguarded. I finally start living in mine. 6 months later, Noah's treatment was progressing better than anyone expected. My new job gave me purpose, stability, and hope. And every Sunday morning, a familiar melody played through my apartment from a small music box sitting beside the window. Ethan and I spoke often. We visited whenever we could. Slowly. Naturally. Without rushing anything. Because some stories are not about finding perfection. They are about finding courage. Looking back, I realized something simple. The richest person is not the one who owns the most. The richest person is the one who learns that love, kindness, and human connection are worth more than anything money could ever buy.